Now, I live very near Deer Park in Fairfax, a wonderful park that I visit on my mountain bike and running many times a week over the course of the 30 years that Carol and I have lived in Fairfax. And that has just nothing to do with the poem I'm going to read, but I wanted you to know a little more about my life. This is called Deer, and it could have been called Deer Park because a deer park does appear in it. And in my case, I was probably thinking, I can make something if I can get started. It's the getting started that's so difficult. So this is a poem about if you can just get started, and it's got to do with deer. To lure a single swivel ear, one tentative twig of a leg, or a nervous tail here, is to mark this place as the Emperor's Park, rife, I say rife with deer. For if one leaf against the littered floor be cleft with the true arc, all this lost ground and more becomes a park. Everywhere the nearest deer signals the nearest dark. A buck looks up. The touch of his rack against wet bark whispers a syllable singular to deer. The next one hears and shifts. The next head stops and lifts deeper and deeper into the park. Somebody tonight asked me, what book is Turtle in? And I can answer, it's in Flamingo Watching, and I thought I would read it. This poem, it was very difficult for me to get acceptance for my work. When I was writing these poems, confessional poetry was very popular. Anything rhymed, anything impersonal, the way my poetry tends to be, superficially, was very much out of favor. I just couldn't get it taken. And there were like 9 years when I couldn't get a book published, and it was a very long and frustrating time. And this poem about the turtle really comes out of that extreme frustration. My brain was like a mouse traps with really light setting. I mean, it was just working too fast, and you'll find that there's really almost too much rhyme and too many images in here because it's just so compacted with frustration. Turtle. Who would be a turtle? Who could help it? A barely mobile hard roll. It's funny too, you know, it's okay that it's funny. A four-oared helmet. She can ill afford the chances she must take in rowing toward the grasses that she eats. Her track is graceless, like dragging a packing case places. And almost any slope defeats her modest hopes. Even being practical, she's often stuck up to the axle on her way to something edible. With everything optimal, she skirts the ditch which would convert her shell into a serving dish. She lives below luck level, never imagining some lottery will change her load of pottery to wings. Her only levity is patience, the sport of truly chastened things. Another thing I adore as a quality is lightness. The problem with lightness is that I always want to pound somebody over the head with it, and then it isn't light anymore. I once wrote a really long, haranguing poem about lightness, but it had these few good lines in it. It said, if a fairy makes a fist, who's impressed? How can lightness insist? You see the problem? Yeah. Well, this little poem is called Dew, which is a very light thing. And I will say no more. As neatly as peas in their green canoe, as discreetly as bees strung in a row, sit drops of dew along a blade of grass. but unattached and subject to their weight. They slip if they accumulate. Down the green tongue, out of the morning sun, into the general damp. They're gone. I love to get profit from what I read, don't we all? But I like to get a poem, especially if I buy a book. I used to be pretty darn cheap. I'm not so cheap anymore, but if I bought a book, I figured I ought to get a poem out of it. I should have bought more books. But in any case, this poem is called Bestiary, and it comes from the most beautiful book. It's a collection of animal stories, a bestiary, by Richard Wilbur. He was the compiler of them. And the illustrations are fantastically gorgeous. They're by Alexander Calder, and it's called a bestiary. And when I got it, I'd always thought of those things as bestiaries, because of course it's describing beasts, and I just never thought of it as a bestiary. And I don't like having been wrong for a long time. It's very upsetting to me. I like to be right and to have always been right. So I had to consider this new word, bestiary, in any case, find out what it meant. A bestiary catalogs bests. The mediocres, both higher and lower, are suppressed in favor of the singularly savage or clever, the spectacularly conjured, the archest of the arch deceivers, who press their advantage without quarter, even after they've won, as of course they would. Best is not to be confused with good. A different creature altogether, and treated of in the goodiary. A text, alas, lost now for centuries. But sometimes I put down a title like, in this case, How Birds Sing. Not knowing, of course, how birds sing. But then I would try to think how they did it. One is not taxed. One need not practice. One simply tips the throat back over the spine axis and asserts the chest. The wings and the rest compress a musical squeeze which floats a series of notes upon the breeze. This is a poem that I would like to dedicate to all the young people in the audience. It's so hard to be filled with promise and be unfinished, so unfinished, and so in the beginning of things. And this is a poem about that. It's called To the Young Anglerfish. Unfortunately, the anglerfish is just a hideous fish. I'm sorry, all the young people. Stephen Jay Gould, the great natural history writer, said of the anglerfish, think about this, the angler's lure required 500 separate modifications to attain its exquisite mimicry. So there was a long time before it got finished, right? Before it worked. I just want you to think about that. So, to the young anglerfish, for now and the next 400 plus generations, the horn-like symptom on your brow. Oh, I should tell you, you may not know how an anglerfish works, how it catches its fish. Well, it's this ugly, ugly fish with a gigantic mouth, and it's got a little funny thing that comes over the top of its head, and it has a little sort of lure, it has a lure on the end, and when something innocent comes by and wants to eat this little fish-like thing in front of its mouth, instead the anglerfish eats it. But, for a long, long, long time, millions of years probably, it didn't work.